council, we would go into executive session and discuss. That was an option we had at the November 1st meeting. However, I felt it was important that we discuss this in public because at that time, our options as a commission were largely known in public anyway. Essentially, the options we believe we have concern a resolution, which would be a statement saying that we don't like this, that, or the other, but having a real legal authority to it. The next kind of step up would be perhaps a moratorium, which would give us the ability to put a stay on the Marcellus Shale activities that we specifically were talked about. And the third option is an ordinance, which I think that's why everyone's here. So we did have that discussion in public, and I was very glad to have that, and this draft ordinance was handed around at that time. During that discussion, this paragraph was one of the items I talked about. Let me read that to you. An industrial operation, quote unquote, as used in this ordinance shall mean any manufacturing facility, power generation facility, mining operation, quarry, or other large-scale excavation, oil or gas production facility, slaughterhouse, tannery, large-scale facility, more than blank animals, for raising pig, or other enterprise that could threaten the environment of Pocahontas County, but it shall not include any operational facility in existence and operating at the time of the enactment of this ordinance. Now, I'll speak for myself, and Commissioner Saffron and Commissioner Walker can speak to this too, but my general recollection of the meeting of November 1st is that none of us really cared too much for that fairly heavy-handed language, I would call it. And we asked at that time that the legal counsel step back from this, take another crack at it, that our concerns were specifically with regard to Marcellus Shale and the potential impacts this industry could have on water, air, roads, way of life, that kind of thing. So that's where we stood on November 1st. It was a wonderful discussion. I'm glad we had it in public, and I'm glad you're all here this evening so that we can talk about this further. That language in particular is kind of a zoning type of paragraph. And my hope, my intent, was not to go for the zoning discussion in our efforts to address the Marcellus Shale concern. But we need to have that full discussion here tonight. I'm glad you're here. So I think Commissioner Saffron, if you want to say a few words.
I would. Thank you. Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for coming. And I always welcome public discussion. I think it's very fruitful to what we're going to do as a community. But one of the most important things we need to do as a community is look at what is the reality of the question and the problem that we're talking about. Now, I've lived here a number of years. I think I've been here 40 years now. And there have been, in the past, issues that have come before the public for which there was no real threat, but it looked like there was. And I'm going to go back over 3 of those just for your recollection. You'll recall the issue of whether there was going to be a dam on the Greenbrier River. And a lot of people were pro and con, and there was an awful lot of heated discussion about an issue which actually, if you looked at the numbers and the dollars, would never happen. Then there was a discussion later on about an airport, whether or not there would be a big airport here. And of course, if you look at the numbers and the dollars, the reality was that that would never happen. Then there was the discussion about protecting Marlington from flooding and the flood wall. And if you look at the real numbers of that and the money, you would realize that that most likely was never going to happen. So when we're looking at the threat or the benefit of drilling in the Marcellus Shale and extracting gas from Pocahontas County, we need to have all the facts before us before we start, how shall I say it, arguing between ourselves or discussing it between ourselves or fighting between ourselves as to whether or not this is really a reality. Now, one of the things that I wanted to do, and I'm glad we had, was Dr. Tim Carr, the PhD geologist who came before us yesterday, and told us, quite frankly, if you look at the geology here, if you look at the reality here, we are really not the prime target. It would be, I think in his words, very unlikely that we would ever see drilling here. Now, from my point of view, I welcome that news, but that's a news and reality that's based in the facts. So before we get into whether we need a big ordinance to deal with a problem that will never happen, I think we need to be sure what the problem is and how we want to address it. One thing I think that's come out of all of this through the many, many months that we've talked about it is that we're all concerned with water. We all are concerned with quality of life, and as a community, we all want to do the right thing. But I don't think it's fruitful at this point to get into a head-to-head discussion about zoning or ordinances when in fact they may be totally unnecessary. It might be very fruitful, I think, at some point for this county commission or another that would follow to say that in this county, water is job number one and value number one, and that every citizen and the government itself will take every action it can to protect water and the quality of life that depend on good, clean water. And actually, I think from listening to Dr. Carr yesterday, if drilling were to come, it would come here 30 or 40 years from now, maybe 50 years from now, and by then the value of our water will be so much more than any cubic foot of gas than you can imagine. There are 7 billion people on the planet right now, and water is going to be more and more and more valuable. So my concern through this whole discussion has been, what is the reality of the problem, how real is the problem, and what is the appropriate, measured, reasonable reaction? And I'm going to say that the ordinance that we were talking about is just an idea about an issue which, if it were like Wetzel County, we would want to throw everything we could to deal with it. But right now, I don't think, quite frankly, thank goodness, we're under that much of the gun. And I'm thankful and relieved for that. So, if we have a discussion tonight, let's keep it in perspective of what the real problem is. And right now, I don't think we're under a real threat. Thank you.
Mr. Walker,
Harold, I was around this room. I was born and raised here. And I said, all the elderly people that own businesses here, that were born here and lived here all their life. And it's obvious, you all know how to run this county. Our water's clean, it's a beautiful place to live, it's a great place to live. It's a hard place to make a living because there's no work here. But it's for you few people sitting around this room that owns what few businesses is left that's made that happen. And when I read this, it upsets me entirely to even think, as us as a commission, we would even consider adopting an ordinance like this. It upsets me. Because this will affect every one of y'all in this room when and if this happens. And I just want to appreciate you coming. I know I talked to a lot of you today and yesterday, and I appreciate you being here.
Okay,